Pray with me. Father, may we live lives of virtue. May we live lives of trust in you, no matter what comes our way. Thank you for the story of Joseph. May we see the way that he lived in relation to you and walk in that way also. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Sacred spaces are in our lives, but we often overlook them. And when I say sacred, I think that a lot of us think of the church. But there are many sacred spaces in our lives. I will say that a very sacred space is the family dinner table. Another sacred space is the mantle place that has photos and mementos of memories past. Another sacred space is the bedroom. Another sacred space is the door of the fridge. Spaces are sacred because of the relationships that they represent, the people that invest themselves in those spaces. And we need to guard those spaces. We need to guard them because they're precious. Joseph, in this part in his story, has just been sold. He's been sold by his brothers to go live, to go work, to go be a slave in a country that is not his own, among a people that are not his own, in customs and rules that are completely foreign to him. And Joseph is leaving his sacred space, his place where his family is, the place where his memories are, the place where his legacy is supposed to be. And he's going to a place that he has no idea about, to be living in somebody else's home, to serve them as a slave there. What would you do when you are faced with a situation like that, a future that is completely unknown, among a people that you don't know how to live around? We're picking up the story in Genesis chapter 39, and it reads like this. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites, who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. So it was from the time that he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he didn't know what he had except for the meal that was in front of him. I tweaked that last part. Joseph is in this foreign place, and we get this part of the story, but we don't know what happened in that first sentence, besides he was on his way down to Egypt. If I were in that place, I would probably my first response would be to freak out. Fear, panic would grip my heart, and I would worry. At some point, whether he went through that stage or not, at some point, Joseph realized that he had no control over what was coming. He had no control, no ability to do anything to get himself out of the situation. When he was leaving and pleading with his brothers to not sell him, and they did. And then as he talked to his captors, trying to explain who he was, they didn't respond. And as he sat there, I imagine on the back of some camel, and with his hands bound, for the first time losing his freedom, for the first time realizing the situation that he's in is completely hopeless, and realizing that he's leaving everything he knows and loves, he turned to the one that he knew he could turn to, the God of his fathers. And so he must have determined, because of what happened afterwards, that he would live a life of virtue. He determined that he would live a life of integrity, that everything he did, he would be trustworthy in. And so Joseph, by the time he gets to Egypt, by the time he sees his new master and hears his weird sounding words come out of his mouth to him, to tell him to follow, that bring him into the house, to tell him what his responsibilities were, Joseph was determined to not be bitter, not try and make life hard for to his master, but to do everything that was expected of him. In a situation like that, I think that's near unthinkable. But Joseph did it. And it says that God was with him, and that everything that he did, God made prosper. So Joseph served God no matter what. And the story continues, of course. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said to him, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" So it was, as she spoke to Joseph day after day, that he did not heed her, to lie with her or be with her. But it happened about this time, when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house were inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. And so it was, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, that she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, "See, he had brought into us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened, when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside." So she kept his garment with her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came to me to mock me. So it happened as I lifted my voice and cried out that he left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was, when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, Your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy. This woman, oh boy, this woman, some observations. This woman of position, this woman of power, this woman of privilege, this woman, she targeted Joseph. She targeted him for a couple of reasons. One, I see that she targeted him because of how he looked. Okay, how he looked. He was attractive. So she objectified him. She turned him into an object, something of her, the object of her desire. Because of the way his flesh and fat hung on his face, she decided to pursue him in this way, the way he looked. Another reason why she targeted him was because of his race. It was a race issue. Throughout this entire chapter, notice how many times Egyptian and Hebrew is mentioned back and forth. There was a racial issue going on here in this chapter. And Joseph, he was the other. He was exotic. He was unconventional. And so the third reason I see here is that Joseph was good. Joseph was honorable. And because he was good and because he was honorable, he was unattainable. And so what does she do? Because she targets him, she grabs his coat. She grabs his coat. And in this story of Joseph's life, people are grabbing for his coat over and over again. Why his coat? Well, I was thinking that since Joseph, he had a character that could not be manipulated. He had a spirit that could not be grabbed hold of and controlled. The only thing that people could grab was his coat. And so she grabs his coat. If somebody can't mess with you, if someone can't break you, if someone can't push you down in your character, in your person, then what do they have left? They have the things that are most external to you, like your reputation, your job, the way you look, what you wear, the way other people see you, the privileges that you have. They'll seek to take away. They grab at whatever they can. And this woman is guilty. She's looking at Joseph, wanting him for herself. She has no care for Joseph. She has no care for her husband. She has no care. She flip-flops. Her stories change. It's unbelievable, yet it's sadly very believable. But she wasn't the only one to blame in this story, because it wasn't just this woman acting alone that put Joseph in the place that he ended up. No, it was also her husband. Her husband, that when he heard, he reacted. And he reacted without thinking. He reacted without questioning the facts. without investigating or asking questions, asking why. why were all of the men of the house conveniently sent away? Why would Joseph, who had shown a record of faithful obedience and trustworthiness up to this point, suddenly turn on his master? Why did she have a robe burn on her hand? The culture that they were in also favored the rich. It was partial to the influential, to the insider versus the outsider. The legal system, that people could be, that it seemed like they were guilty before they were proven innocent. It's just the complete opposite. It was that people could be convicted of a crime without an investigation or evidence. And that the other people implicit in this wrongful act are the other servants. The servants that said nothing. Now, to this terrible situation, this culture and these people that have captured him, oppressed him, how does Joseph respond? How does Joseph respond? He stays true to his resolve to honor God. He resolves to live virtuously, even when no one else does. He resolves to live virtuously. And two, he resisted participation in the system. He resisted being okay with the status quo, just doing what other people did, regardless of the consequences to himself. And three, he ran out of that house. And even though he resolved and he resisted and he ran, terrible things still happened to him. I think about in 1 Peter, the book of 1 Peter, in the first chapter, Peter, as he's writing to the early Christians, to the early church, he's writing and he refers to them as people of the dispersion, the people that have been dispersed. And it's kind of this echo back to a time in early Jewish history, in earlier Jewish history, where they were no longer in the promised land, the land that God had given them, and they were in Babylon, that they were in a country, in a culture, in a space where they were being, they didn't belong, and they were being influenced to conform to customs, and they were learning how to live a life of integrity in this culture that was not their high value. And so we get these stories like Daniel and Esther, these people of integrity, and Daniel's friends, in this space of compromise. And so Peter, he talks to the early church and he goes, "You of the dispersion," like he's talking to them, saying, we are in the same situation as our forefathers were back then, that we are not in our homeland, and so we are foreigners. They were foreigners, and they knew it, but not all of them were Jewish, and some of them were they were born and raised in the places that they were practicing their faith, but they too felt that they were foreigners, that they didn't quite belong, and they used this concept of being a foreigner, being a citizen of the kingdom of heaven, while living on earth, as part of their identity. And this identity as foreigners gave them joy, because they were doing something. They were living according to a government of love. They were reacting and responding to the culture and situations around them in ways that the world looked at like, that's weird. Why are you doing that? That's not what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be looking out for yourself. Why are you taking care of others? Why are you not trying to get even with the people that do you wrong? Why aren't you, and they had a long list of that, and that's another sermon. But they looked at this identity as foreigners with joy. It was special to them. We are foreigners in a foreign land. That same characteristic, that same identity as being foreigners, serving a government that was higher and that served God rather than self and all the things the world exonerates, also gave them incredible persecution. That the thing that brought them joy in their identity also brought them persecution. Because they lived a different way. They responded differently. They lived lives of virtue. I see an illustration in our nation's history that the image of the American woman being a woman of virtue, but differently than I think we've stereotypically expected, or that we've popularized. There was a song written during World War II, and I think it was 1940, when it was called Rosie the Riveter, and it was about this woman that joined the workforce. She didn't do what the stereotypical woman did at the time and stay home and raise a family and cook in the kitchen. And instead, she was in the workforce. She was using heavy machinery in order to these power tools in order to get manual labor done in order to help the war effort and with the kind of injustices that were being fought against during that time. And so this image of Rosie the Riveter that was doing a man's work and doing it better, in fact. And it was a great song that became quite popular. A number of years later, Norman Rockwell, still during the war, he painted an image that was used on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post 77 years ago yesterday. And this image, people immediately recognized as Rosie the Riveter, from that song that they had become quite popular. And this image was embedded in people's minds as a virtuous American woman, not this image of sultry and submissiveness. Instead, it was this image of a woman that met great need with determination and courage. She had grit under her nails and her hair was wrapped to work, doing hard labor and doing it well. When I was reading up on this particular image and what it created in 1944, because of these inspirational depictions of women in the workforce, in 1944, for a couple of months, it reached its peak where single women in their 20s and 30s, there were twice as many women in the workforce than single men in the defense industry. Specifically, that's where the statistic comes from. That there were so many women that were taking up these demanding, stereotypically men roles that were only given to men, that they thought only men could do. And I remember another statistic saying that I think it was 28% of jobs in North America, in in the United States were considered fit for women, and then that was reevaluated after women stepped into the workforce and proved otherwise. Up to 80% of jobs could be done by women, and yeah, not the ideal, but it jumped amazingly because of these virtuous women, these American women in that time. Now, even though they stepped up to incredible need and against incredible odds, there was one story of a woman that, oh, what was the title? Mouthful of Rivets? Oh, I don't remember the name of the book. But she said when they were working on this aircraft, all of these women were working on this aircraft, and when it finally rolled off of the production line, they were amazed. They were so happy, and they said, "We did it! We did it!" During this time, women of all nationalities were working side by side, and prejudice dropped considerably during this time because people were recognized for who they were rather than the color of their skin or from their origins or background or their gender, that they were working together for this common cause, and they were succeeding incredibly well. After the war was over, servicemen were coming back from the war front, and as they came back, they needed jobs. And so the women that had stepped up and had accomplished incredible feats and had done the work as good or even better than their male counterparts were asked to step out of the workforce, and they were either let go, or they were pressured, or they decided to go back into the home and to work there, and there was this shift. It was kind of like, you needed us and we did well, but we're not wanted anymore. It's just a sad thing. In the 1980s, another depiction it re-emerged. It was an old painting, and it came back up, and this is what we popularly think of when we hear the name Rosie the Riveter. And this image in the 1980s became an image of what women could do, what women could accomplish, and what the women had done in World War II. This was accentuated again. Now today, in our current context, Terrence Osborne, an artist from New Orleans, he painted this updated, iconic image entitled Front Line. And I think it's an incredible painting. Now, these were the people from the past. This was Joseph. These are women during World War II, and even for the frontline workers today. But what about you? What about you? Like Joseph, has sheer panic gripped your heart as you find yourself bound and dragged into this new reality ahead of you, against your will? Have you, like Joseph, resolved to honor God no matter what powers or pressures grab at you? Like Joseph, being trusted, do you feel that you're being trusted but then also despised at the same time? Do you feel that people label you as important but then put limits on you? Or do you feel needed but then you find yourself let go from your workforce? Do you hear people say that you're essential, but then you find that you're also replaceable when you get burnt out? Joseph finds himself in prison after living, after working, after existing as a slave with valor, with principle, with integrity, his reward is prison. But God was with Joseph. These stories and these sermons have been ending in these points of incompletion. These stories conclude without a nice little resolve with a bow on top. And our reality, our lives, they're not wrapping up nicely. There's a lot of unknowns ahead of us. There's a lot of things that we don't understand. There's a future that we're facing that is uncertain, unknown, incredibly wonky. But God is with us. And we must resolve to live lives of integrity, to live virtuously, and to realize that sacred is where God is, and sacred is where we guard. The connections that we have with each other in our church, in our community, in our families, these are sacred. And the various places that we interact, that we exist, these are sacred. How will you live? How will you connect? How will you create this space for others? How will you acknowledge the virtue that people are moving in your sphere? How will you resist the systems that are pulling you towards an us versus them mentality? How will you embrace the newness of the unknown while keeping your character upright and solid? And what will you decide? I need to run from this temptation to objectify somebody, or to be placed in a position where I can't maintain my integrity. We must live lives like Joseph. We must live lives of valor and virtue in the face of opposition, in the face of hard times, even in the face of being treated not like we deserve. How will you live your life virtuously? Is my question to you. And as we continue through this story of Joseph, trace where God's hand is. Sometimes it's pointed out and sometimes it's not. And as we go through this story together, may we be in connection with each other. Will you pray with me? God, we want to live virtuous lives. We want to live in connection to you, to honor you in everything that we do. In the situations that are difficult, in the situations that are oppressive, may we stand with integrity for you, no matter what happens. This is our resolve. And this is how we'll move forward into the unknown. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. May God bless you.